During summer break from college, I took a job working as a park ranger in a very small southern park. This was not Yellowstone, nor the Grand Canyon, but a 3,000-acre, rarely used wilderness area with a small campground, a remote cabin popular for honeymoons, and a tiny visitor center/museum. Any ranger can tell you that things can get a bit creepy out in the woods at night. We have all heard noises, seen something running away, etc., and we become a bit callous to it. Usually it is a deer or a possum, or the wind blowing a branch in an odd way. But sometimes there isn't an explanation, and we can be left a bit shaken. After the park closes each night, we have a local woman who cleans the visitor center. It was my job to unlock and lock the building for her. One night, she seemed a bit shaken when she left, and I asked her what had happened. She told me that she saw someone in the building with her, but only out of the corner of her eye. When she would look up, she would be alone. I asked her to describe what she saw, and she told me that it was a woman wearing a white dress. I thought it was probably nothing, or just the dark, lonely night playing tricks on her. She left, and I thought I would double check just in case there was something to it. The fuses had already been flipped, so the building was dark. I went in with my flashlight and searched the entire building. Just as I thought, there was nobody there. She quit the job shortly after that, and although it was to take a better job elsewhere, I believe that night had something to do with her decision. Several weeks later, I received a late-night call from our most secluded spot in the park. It was a small log cabin built in the early 1900s and refitted with some modern convenience. A popular romantic weekend spot due to its quaintness and remoteness. The night I received the call, it was midsummer, and a storm was promising to appear in the coming hours. The wind was picking up by the minute. The call came in at midnight. The woman said, "I think someone may be lost or looking for something out here." I told her I would be there in 10 minutes and headed up to the one-lane gravel road to the cabin. The drive was uneventful. The wind was dropping leaves and small branches, while lightning began to flash and light up the forest. But there was no sign of a person along the path. I arrived at the cabin, and the woman cracked the door as I approached and was visibly shaken. She told me she had woken up when she heard a branch fall on the roof and decided to make a cup of coffee. As she stood in the small kitchen, she looked outside, and in a flash of lightning, saw a woman standing in the woods. She thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, so she continued to look out the window for the next flash. As the forest lit up, the woman was gone. She chalked it up to drowsiness and made her coffee, then sat down on the couch. She glanced out of the living room window, and as the lightning flashed again, the woman was standing on the gravel road looking at her. She was positive the woman was real by this point and opened the front door. She yelled to her, asking if she was lost or needed help. When the lightning flashed again, the woman was gone. It was then that she called the park emergency number, me. I, of course, asked her what the woman looked like, and she told me that she was wearing a white dress, something like a wedding gown or a nightgown. I left the cabin and searched the surrounding woods, but there was nothing. I took the truck further down the road and searched the area for another hour. I went back to all of our trailheads, and there were no vehicles, so no lost hikers. I checked the campground, and the only camper had left earlier at signs of foul weather. The park was empty, except for me and the woman in the cabin. It was almost 4 a.m. when I decided to check an area below the cabin one last time. Once again, nothing. I climbed back into the truck and went to crank the engine, but I stopped. The hair stood up on my arms and neck. It was the familiar feeling of not being alone, the feeling of eyes upon me. I was looking forward into the darkness, and there was nothing in front of my truck. But from the corner of my eye, At the passenger window stood a woman. I didn't look at her. I fought my instinct to turn, and I kept my eyes forward. She stood there, looking at me. I couldn't tell her features, but her dress showed white, even in the darkness. My heart stopped. Lightning split the sky, and I turned. There was nothing. I stepped out of the truck and looked around, but I was alone. The lightning flashed again, and the forest was empty. I looked to where the woman was standing, and there were no footprints. I was a bit shaken as I climbed back in the truck and drove down to meet the day ranger at the station. When I told him what had happened, he laughed. "So you met the woman in white?" I was astounded. "What?" He pulled a folder from his desk and handed it to me. Inside were newspaper clippings from the early 1920s. A local woman had dated her childhood sweetheart for years, until she had left him broken-hearted. A year later, she was engaged, with an outdoor wedding at the park. Her former boyfriend showed up, and shot and killed her groom. A few days later, the distraught woman returned to the park, and hanged herself from a tree, near the site of the rustic log cabin. Apparently, she is a common sight to the rangers on the park, and seems to have no ill will, although it's kind of understood that it's best to ignore her. I caught glimpses of her a few more times that summer, but never as close as that night. I left the park at the end of the summer, but I still sometimes think about the woman in white, still out there, searching for her lost groom. This happened about 6 years ago. I was 21, and around 6 or 7 months pregnant with my son. My ex-boyfriend and I had just moved into a new house a few months before this happened. It was a cute little house in a neighborhood really close to the sketchy part of town. Jack was in the National Guard, and was leaving for the weekend to go about 2 hours away. I have never been afraid of being home alone. I've actually always enjoyed it. But being pregnant and close to a shitty part of town left me feeling more vulnerable and paranoid. The evening went by fine. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and at 9:30 or 10 I had laid down to watch a movie until I fell asleep. Around 11:30 I woke up out of nowhere with a weird feeling. I don't remember hearing anything that would cause me to wake up, so it was odd that I did. For reference, we had a laundry/storage room and a garage that was on the actual ground level of the house. Then there are about 13 steep stairs going up to a covered porch and the front door. You couldn't see the stairs from the road, so it would be a perfect spot to sit undetected. My bedroom window was right above those stairs. All of a sudden I saw a shadow go across my window. I started to get freaked out, but I tried to talk myself into believing my sleepy eyes were playing tricks on me. As I'm staring at the window from my bed, I see the silhouette of a person slowly rise up, like they had been crouching down on my stairs. They were just standing right in front of my window for a few long seconds. I like to think I'm a pretty tough person, and I have been in scary situations before and kept my cool. But this time, I was frozen with fear. The figure then raised its hand and pressed it against the window. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow banged on the window super loud 3 times. I got up and grabbed a baseball bat in the corner of the room and my phone. Just as I was about to dial 911, I saw flashing police lights going down my street, and the figure slowly disappeared down my stairs again. For some reason, I called my mom instead of 911, and waited a minute before going over to the window to see if anyone was hiding there. The stairs were empty. My mom calmed me down, and I told her that she didn't need to come over. I didn't get any sleep that night. The next day I was going out to my car, and one of my neighbors told me a house up the street got broken into. A lady woke up to a guy in her house going through her purse. He ran outside and down the road as she called the cops. I'm guessing when the guy ran out and saw the police car coming up the road, he saw my house and hid behind the wall on my stairs because it was convenient. However, I don't know why he felt the need to bang on my window, which could only bring attention to himself, but he certainly scared the shit out of me by doing so. My grandmother passed away a few weeks ago. While I mourned her death like everyone else in the family, I couldn't help but envy her toward the end. She was 97 when she passed. 97, with full mastery over all her capabilities. She was bright, animated, and had a memory that would put most 20-year-olds to shame. Grandma June left this earth in a manner that few people do. She passed away of old age. The folks at the nursing home assured us that she departed peacefully in her sleep. My grandmother was one of a kind, and she'll truly be missed by a lot of people. She's been on my brain a lot. By that admission, you'd assume I was still in the grieving process. In a lot of ways, you'd be correct in that assumption, minus a slight revision. I'm not still grieving over her. I'm grieving over her words. The last words she'd ever speak to me. Words that, if true, would shake our collective notions of religion and the afterlife down to their very marrow. In order for you to understand, you'd first need to know about the whisper game. I first heard those words when I was 10. I was spending the weekend with my grandmother. After my grandfather died of a heart attack just 1 year prior, I made a vow to spend as much time with Grandma June as I possibly could. During that particular visit, she could see that something had me visibly shaken. And she was right. I had recently been playing with one of the neighborhood kids. Our Saturday morning playdate took a turn for the worst when he decided to proudly show me a cat that he had killed. I remembered that bothering the shit out of me. After an entire day trying to get me to spill the beans, I finally broke down in my grandmother's arms. I asked her why a person would do something like that. That's when she first told me about them. The Whisper people and their whisper game. My mother's family is of Slavic ancestry. They migrated to America in the 1800s. And like other immigrants, they brought their stories with them to the New World. It was a story that my grandmother told me, and her grandmother told her. Without going into detail, she alleged that those randomly intrusive and evil thoughts that we all get from time to time aren't our thoughts at all. It's the whisperers. The whisperers existed beyond our perceivable reality. Their sole purpose was to make us hurt ourselves or others. She told me that they are always around us, always whispering. Some whisper louder than others. They win the whisper game if they eventually manage to influence us. Whenever I asked Grandma June what the whisper people got for winning, she simply smiled and said, "Doesn't matter, because we're never going to let them win, are we?" It was at that question when I'd quickly shake my head and say no. The whisper people would soon become our little inside joke. Years later, I'd also make a habit of visiting her in the nursing home. Some days we'd talk and watch TV, while others were spent with me reading her favorite John Grisham novels to her. That day I was going to read The Firm. I could tell upon arriving that something was off. She wasn't her usual jovial self. I attributed the sudden change to a random shift in the weather. Clear, sunny skies outside had quickly deteriorated into black, menacing storm clouds. Halfway through the second chapter, she turned to me with a grave expression in her eyes. "Would you like to know the truth about the whisperers?" she asked with a silent frown. Intrigued and slightly taken aback, all I could do to acknowledge her random question was nod. She told me that there was no heaven or hell. When people passed away, They simply went to the other place. Nobody knew what or where the other place was, only that it served as the next stop for those who had recently passed from the world of the living. As the conversation progressed, I'd learned that in that void, there was more than just the other place. There was also Baba Yaga, a monstrous creature that dwelled on the other side. Baba Yaga took great pleasure in many things, but the one thing it enjoyed more than anything else was disrupting the world of man. While unable to manipulate us directly, it would wait for those on their way to the other place. Because they were once human, these wayward souls still held a weak connection with the physical world. Baba Yaga would capitalize on this connection by presenting an offer to those who'd listen. She'd send those spirits back into the world, under the condition that they'd whisper into the ears of the living. They'd whisper day in and day out, until they found someone susceptible to their influence. If they were able to convince a person to either kill themselves or another, Baba Yaga would use dark powers in the other realm, placing that spirit inside the body of a newborn baby. My grandmother said that for every soul that passed into the other place, 2 would stay behind, taking Baba Yaga's offer. They'd be doomed to wander the earth until they achieved their end of the bargain. The whole thing was a vicious cycle, a hell in itself, once you realized the futility of it all. Those spirits had become so desperate that they'd force others to kill, just for another chance at life. A life that, inevitably, will end itself. This was the true nature of the Whisper game. It was all a sick joke, orchestrated to amuse only one. My grandmother told me that she was afraid that Baba Yaga would be there waiting for her, that she wouldn't be able to turn down the offer. I couldn't tell if she was pulling an elaborate prank, or if she actually believed the words that were coming out of her mouth. I'd never find out. She died 2 days later. While that was our last time speaking, those weren't her last words to me. Her last words came in the form of a voicemail that I'd received a few hours before her death. I was busy at work, so I'd had my phone on silent for the duration of the day. When I finally checked my messages, her voice caught me off guard. She never called. The message was simple and brief. "We can't let them win. Isn't that right, kiddo?" Her tone was chipper and optimistic. She sounded like she always did. I'm writing this because a couple of days ago, I had these thoughts. Really, really horrible thoughts. Don't get me wrong, I've had intrusive thoughts before. We all have. But this was different. This was way more vivid, more intense. I was at a restaurant having dinner with my girlfriend, when I suddenly had the overwhelming desire to stab her in the eye with a steak knife, and then slit my own throat. The urge was so jolting that I ran into the bathroom, just to catch my breath, and splash some water on my face. In the seconds after drenching myself, I glanced at the mirror, catching a glimpse of a figure that would vanish only a fraction of a second later. It was my grandmother. She was standing there, with her head cocked to the side. Her mouth hung open, as if her jaw had been unhinged. And then there were the eyes. Her eyes looked as if they had been replaced with clear glass marbles. When I was a kid, I always wanted to know the truth about the Whisperers. Now I do. We are the Whisperers. I met this guy about a year ago. Let's call him Mitchell, at a meeting for our school's running club. He was pretty cool, and shared my passion for fitness, so we ran and worked out together quite a bit. Mitchell and his family are very devout Christians, but I soon realized that many of the practices they engage in can be considered quite extreme. For example, when news of Pokemon Go were first released a few months ago, I casually mentioned my love for the cartoons as a child. He suddenly got extremely aggressive and told me that his father had burnt all his Pokemon toys when he was younger, and that Pokemon came from the devil. Another time he didn't show up to school for an entire week. When I asked him about it, he explained that he had had a vision that the family was in danger, so they all stayed home that entire week. Fast forward a few months, he asked me to prom. Honestly, I was quite put off by the idea, but reluctantly agreed because I couldn't bring myself to say no. It was his senior year, and I figured that it was the least I could do as a friend. This was when things really started to get weird. With 5 days to go before prom, he started texting me every single day, along with a reference to a Bible verse. I looked them all up. Just 5 days to go. Can't wait for it. Hope you're excited too. Matthew 7:21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one that does the will of my Father. 4 days. The anticipation is killing me. Jude 1:14 and 15. The Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones, to judge everyone, and to convict all of them of all the ungodly acts they have committed in their ungodliness, and of all the defiant words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. 3 days. Each day draws you closer to me. Jeremiah 19:9. I will see to it that your enemies lay siege to the city, until all the food is gone. Then those trapped inside will eat their own sons and daughters. They will be driven to utter despair. 2 days. Can't wait for us to get it on. Genesis 19:8. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. Tomorrow is our big day. Deuteronomy 22:29. If a man is caught in the act of raping a young woman who is not engaged, he must pay 50 pieces of silver to her father. Then he must marry the young woman because he violated her, and he will never be allowed to divorce her. I was bewildered why he would send me these kind of verses, and in hindsight, baffled by why I decided that I would still go to prom with him. On the night of prom, I was able to avoid one-on-one interactions with him for the most part, by staying amongst a large circle of friends. When the inevitable slow dance came, however, I found myself once again reluctant to refuse to take his hand. He wrapped his arms around me, and I could feel his warm breath on my neck. Suddenly, he started whispering songs of worship in my ear. I recall one of the lines being something like, "Those who do not believe will burn in hell eternally." As you may expect, I just wanted to get home after prom and never have to see him again. However, since his father picked us up, there was nothing I could do when they insisted that I have supper with their family. When we got back to their house, and I am seriously never going to forget this moment ever, Mitchell looked me dead in the eyes, smiled, and said, "It's time. You've been chosen." I looked out the car window and saw his mother, sister, and brother standing single file holding hands and smiling at us. I noped the fuck out of there and ran to the nearest gas station, where my mother picked me up. I hope I never see him again. I have a college friend who now works as a full-time DJ at a local radio station. During one of our get-togethers, he shared this story, which happened to him on Halloween last year. My friend, let's call him Wade, has been a DJ for this local station for almost 6 years now. The station was located in one of the oldest buildings downtown. Typically, Wade's shift is 3 to 7 p.m. However, that particular night was different. It was actually his day off, so he didn't expect the station manager to call him in and say that he had to sit in for another DJ who called in sick. Needless to say, Wade wasn't thrilled. The night shift was pretty boring. Most of the DJs would just load a list of songs without much talking, and he knew it would bore him to death. Besides, he was popular among listeners as somewhat of a talker. Wade was unfamiliar with the silence that greeted him when he parked his car in the basement. Usually he had to fight off other people for a parking space, but tonight it was eerily deserted. He shrugged off the sense of dread and headed towards the elevator right away. This elevator is unusually slow. When it finally opened on his floor, he was surprised to find that only the small incandescent lights on both ends of the long hallway were lit. Did they decide to close for the night? He glanced around, looking for any signs of life. They're supposed to be on air 24/7. Wade jumped when a hand grabbed his left shoulder. It was Jerry, the custodian. "They told me you'll sit in for Rick tonight," Jerry quipped.
"You scared me. Anyhow, where have you been? You've been gone for a while."
Wade liked Jerry, an older man in his 50s. He's been the building custodian for a long time, and was one of the most trustworthy people in the workplace.
"When did you get back?"
Wade asked. Something was different in Jerry's eyes. It almost seemed as if they were sad. Wade couldn't quite tell. Maybe he'd just come back from sick leave and is just recovering. Everyone in the building knew Jerry was talkative, lively, and generally a happy guy. Wade was waiting for Jerry to talk when his mobile phone rang. Just as he was about to answer the call, he caught a glimpse of Jerry exiting the hallway through the stairwell. He answered the phone. It was his manager, asking whether Wade was already on air. He replied, saying he was about to, and proceeded to his workstation. To gain listeners, Wade decided he would follow his usual afternoon show format. He would ask listeners to call in and talk about his chosen topic. Since it was Halloween, Wade made it the paranormal. To his amazement, the dull late-night show became lively and energetic. Many callers expressed their doubt, saying that ghosts are just figments of human imagination. A few were believers who related their own scary encounters. One call caught Wade's attention, though. It was from a woman called Marie. She said she believed in ghosts and was used to seeing them all the time. Wade was doubtful of the stories she related, but he was intrigued when Marie told him she lived near the station and was willing to drop by and share all her encounters on air. Thinking it would gain him more listeners, he invited her to come be his guest, to which Marie simply said yes and hung up. Wade continued on, accepting phone calls from listeners. After 15 minutes or so, the door opened. Thinking it was Jerry, Wade was surprised to see a girl. She was about 22, fair-skinned, with big, sad eyes and long black hair. Wade thought there was something odd about her, but he couldn't quite place it. The girl introduced herself as Marie. After a song, Wade introduced her to his listeners. Soon enough, they were flooded with phone calls, mostly questions for Marie. She gamely answered them, despite the fact that some callers were rude, telling her she is a complete joke. Feeling that she was on the air for long enough, and that it was getting late, he decided to thank Marie and offered to call a cab. Marie just smiled and said, "I have a feeling that you don't believe me."
"What? No, I mean, we all have doubts."
"What can I do to make you believe?" she asked, catching him off guard.
"Okay, just to end this, when was the last time you saw a ghost?"
"Just today," Marie answered, tilting her head so that her long hair covered her face. "There's this girl, a call center agent, who was coming home from work. 3 unknown guys grabbed her and raped her. She was stabbed to death." Wade thought he could almost hear Marie whimpering. Then, almost at a whisper, she continued. "One of them gouged out her left eye."
"That's terrible. Did the ghost tell you who the men were?" Have you gone to the police?
Wade couldn't believe what he was hearing. If Marie's story was true, then she could be instrumental in solving a crime. He looked at her. She stopped, tilting her head, and what he saw made his skin crawl. Marie's face was horribly disfigured, and an empty eye socket gaped at him. Blood started to ooze from her body, dappling her white shirt with crimson. It was her. "Please help me," she screamed, rising from her seat and going straight for Wade. He pushed his chair hard and ran out the door towards the elevator. He hit the button and panicked because it was taking so long. Finally, the doors opened. Heart pumping, he ran in and smashed the ground floor button. The next thing he knew, he was at the front desk, while the 2 night guards were helping him onto a chair. After a cup of coffee, he related his experience to them. The guards just looked at each other and never said a word. The next day, Wade's boss scolded him. Apparently, the station was on dead air the entire night. And he also found out that Jerry had passed away 2 weeks ago. Wade never worked a night shift again. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. Be good to animals, even people. So.
Ja, snämar, bärksbus, rish.
Okay, we're gonna get in, get the money, and get out.
Okay.
Okay, put your mask on. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Stay right fucking there, asshole. Don't fucking move. Now where's the money?
What money?
Shut up. Where is it? Answer me. Fine, I'll fucking find it myself. Here, keep this on him. If he even makes a peep, shoot him.
What's a peep?
What do you mean, what's a peep? If he makes a fucking noise.
All right.
What the hell happened?
He farted.
Well, Jesus. Let's get the hell out of here.
Did you get the money?
No, I didn't get the money. I didn't really have time, since you blew his head off for farting.